All right, as you mentioned before the break, Idaho's colleges and universities are kind of circling the wagons when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Trying to push it to the side, change the names, make it seem like it's not there on their school grounds. Well, the State Board of Education is kind of helping reinforce that circle of defense by coming up with a resolution, a draft resolution that they talked about for the first time a couple of weeks ago before the Thanksgiving break. But today they talked more about it, and this time with the state's DEI committee. Aspen Shumpert was there to listen in.
Idaho students are worried about the future of diversity, equity, and inclusion resources on public university campuses.
These are the resources we come to love and need to have, so it's imperative that we have a say in this. If you're going to take it away, then you won't take it away without our voice.
At Monday's DEI committee meeting, committee members heard a resolution draft from the State Board of Education.
The importance of going forward is making sure that those students know where to go and that singular area of focus knows that they can get the support for whatever they need there.
It's the same resolution the State Board of Ed introduced at a special meeting November 21st. The resolution, if passed, states there will be no DEI central offices or policies on campus for students or in relation to hiring and applications.
I would argue that if a student club, and we've had many discussions with other institutions about that, wants to start something, they should have the freedom and right to do that, because that is freedom of assembly and that is student-led. What we're talking about here is from an institutional focus. Should the institutional focus be on one group or another, or should it be about all students?
One of the DEI committee members, Senator Melissa Wintrow, pushed back on the draft's intention.
Have there been complaints filed that programs are denying access to other folks? For example, Women's Center denying men access to the Women's Center at U of I.
The reality that support, whether Women's Centers excludes men or not, right, is a focus. Would a man go to a Women's Center? Yeah, but in average person terms, would you know to go get support at a Women's Center?
Senator Wintrow says she's seen it with her own eyes at Boise State.
In my time there, 2 men came to the center who had been raped by other men. And they weren't going to go somewhere else because they had been raped by other men.
While other Idaho public universities have already decided to cut DEI resources without the resolution passed, several Boise State students sat in the room Monday, hoping their campus isn't next to make cuts.
We are housed under these centers, and these are things that I come as a second home to me, as a place of community, in a state where I don't really see people like me a lot that aren't on the football team.
Charles says he is disappointed other universities decided to cut DEI resources, but he's not surprised.
It's been known that in times of uncertainty and fear, that sometimes they will jump shit and rip the Band-Aid off before it's done. So it's very sad that they didn't stick in the fight.
And he wants Boise State to stick in the fight.
If they're taken away, then it's going to be dropping of making a school more inclusive to people of the LGBT communities, black, brown communities, taking the resources they need to channel the hard ways of life, especially in a state like Idaho.
Students I've spoken to across multiple universities discussing these changes to DEI resources want Idaho lawmakers and members of the State Board of Education to know how these resources have positively impacted their college experience, but also those in power are missing a piece of the puzzle here, that DEI offices on these campuses are already open to all students. So that question still comes to many of these students of why do they have to close if they're open to all and we're trying to get to this kind of center for everyone.
And I think Senator Winstrow's question of have you had any complaints about these programs or policies and offices on campuses?
Yeah.
And I think that's an important one to ask and to get an answer to.
Yeah, and we heard Senator Wintrow ask that question, and the State Board of Ed didn't have something to give back, and they didn't have data to show that. I think it's probably something they're going to look into now that they've gotten feedback from the DEI committee, and certainly more questions were raised about this resolution.
And some of you might remember, it was several years ago when this first was brought up at the state legislature, when there was complaints of a Boise State student who was made to feel inferior because of his, for being white, and to apologize for being white. was proven to not be true. So that allegation, I mean, you can hear and have these allegations, but none of that has been proven true yet. So they're just kind of have to look into that. As you said, it's going to take some investigative work to find out if there are any complaints about these programs. All right. Thank you very much, Aspen.